again. This is Diana Catherine Plopa. I am with Pages Promotions, and we're here with another episode of Indie Reads TV. Today, my guest is Ron Herron. He is a multi-award winning author. 7 books, right, Ron?
7, yes.
7 books. You've got 2 or 3 more in the works, I think?
3 in the works, yes.
3 in the works. Really great stuff. We're going to talk about all your work in the next half hour and introduce people to you, and maybe they'll come find you and buy your books. That's the goal, anyway.
I hope so.
So, thanks for being here. I'm so glad you could come.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
I know it's kind of been a scheduling thing for us, but I'm glad we finally got it to work.
Yeah.
First of all, give me a little bit about your background. I know you come from a marketing background. And give me an idea of your background and then how you segued into being this multi-book author.
Well, I've always been a writer and a reader. I was in advertising and marketing and public relations for a long time. Worked at a lot of ad agencies. Then I went to work for GM in their public relations department. Wound up in their marketing department. But along the way, I've been writing. I'd write an occasional article or short story and submit it someplace and collect rejection slips. And
that's always fun.
And and every once in a while, I'd sell one, and my wife would say, "Oh, that's great. How much did you make?" And when I told her, she said, "That's it." So I have to keep working. But I did that because I enjoy writing. And it's just something I've always done.
So the genres that you write, you write in a couple of different forms. Historical fiction. I call it historical. It's not really old historical fiction. It's Vietnam era, Korea War era.
Right.
But I call it historical fiction because it happened before.
Right.
It's history.
Well, I even got one that happened in the 1830s.
Oh, so truly historical fiction.
Historical.
And then you also write a little bit of science fiction.
Fantasy.
Fantasy.
Fiction, yeah.
And then the other thing that I find interesting is that you have 2 books that are the only way I can classify them are as Native American folklore. Not in the traditional sense of folklore, but that they are Native American in character and scope, I guess, is the word I would use for it. Not like Old West Indian kind of, but more more learning about a Native American culture, I guess, from a fictional point of view. So I get asked this all the time because I write in multiple genres. How do you approach writing in multiple genres, and how do you keep them separate? Do you work one at a time, or do you intermix, jump from genre to genre? How do you handle doing that?
Well, like I said, I've got 3 books going on right now, 3 new ones, and they mix genres. And I'm not one of those people that can outline and write to an outline.
Okay.
I come up with a character. I describe to myself the character, so I know what they look like and sound like and talk like and what their history is in my head. What the education, what religion, everything, all the details.
So you start with a character map.
And I start with a character, and then I pose a what if question.
Okay.
What if this happened? What would that character do? And I let him tell me.
So, how do you come up with what's the impetus for the scenarios you drop your characters into? Is it just because these are things that you personally are interested in, or is it because there's a character that might fit more appropriately into a particular genre scenario? Like, are you writing Native Americans because because you have a scenario in mind for that, or are the characters driving the plot?
I had an idea in mind. The one you're probably talking about is Blood Lake, which is this one.
That one, yeah. Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
And that does center around well, it begins with the Cherokee in 1838 or whatever year it was, and I got interested in that because I found out through an old family Bible and then some research my father had done that there's a full-blooded Cherokee in my ancestry.
Wow.
So I was just looking up stuff about the Cherokee Indians, and I was wasting time, really. And
I call that brain doodling.
yeah, okay, that works. That sounds better. And I came across a letter that was written by the characters. Well, it wasn't a character; it was a real person. His name was John Burnett, and he had written a letter to his family on his 80th birthday, describing the things that he had done in the Cherokee removal, 60 years before that, and that made me interested in looking that up because it was in part of the country I was born in,
Mm-hmm.
and I still have a lot of relatives down there, and so I started looking up the Cherokee, and I came across a thing on the Cherokee Historical Society has a website, and one of their pages had that letter, but it also had information about an Indian called Tasali, who was a full-blooded Cherokee, who was considered a prophet by the Cherokee, and he supposedly he tried to hide in the Smoky Mountains in his family,
Right.
and they found him, and they executed him and his son. These are the American soldiers, as an example to the other Indians so they wouldn't try to avoid the forced migration. And supposedly he cursed the one soldier that he knew. He knew a soldier that actually spoke Cherokee. And as they were coming to execute, they made him watch them execute his son, and then they executed him. And the Indian cursed John Burnett,
Mm-hmm.
and every firstborn son in his family for all time.
Wow.
And that put the thought in my head, well, okay, our curse is real, and he was a prophet. Does that have any meaning to it? What if?
So that became
And that
Blood Lake.
became Blood Lake, yeah.
Wow.
Because it starts with all the historical part is right up in the front, and then it segues into a modern-day John Burnett, who gets invited down to Tennessee to what he thinks is a fishing trip, but it turns out that he's the 8th generation of a family under this curse.
Wow.
And it just goes from there.
See, you told me about this book about a year ago, and I thought it was interesting then, and now I'm even more interested in it all over again. So I'm going to have to go get me a copy. I have so many books on my TBR list. I just started reading Zebulon, which is your collection of short stories.
Right, it's a fantasy short
I
story.
think I have the cover. Let me see if I can scroll to the cover. There it is.
That's it.
I just started reading this when we were away on vacation, and I got through the first story, and I was just really taken with it. Your writing style is wonderful. It's very easy, very comfortable read.
I like to leave it so that when you're turning the page, you want to turn the page.
Yeah, and that was the thing. But it wasn't a. I feel like I have to read the page to get through it. It was I have to turn the page so I can savor it. So when I was out grilling dinner the other night, I was supposed to be babysitting chicken in my grill, and I almost burned the chickens because I was so focused on reading your work. And my husband comes out and says, chickens? Are they burning? Well, maybe. I'll put the book down. So it was
be a story in that.
challenging. Yeah, no, let's not go there. So tell me about this. Where did you, you're writing, the other books that you have are novels. They're
Right.
So where did you get the idea to, now I'm going to do a collection of short stories?
Well, like I say, I've always written, and I had short stories. In fact, my first novel was written as a a rewrite of a whole lot of short stories that were about some of the same characters.
Okay.
And I took all of those, and that was Reichhold Street. And I took all of those and I rewrote it so that they would flow into a story.
Into a full
novel.
Mm-hmm. But they started as short stories.
A lot of it started as short stories.
One of my books started that way too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you didn't find changing that format of novel to short story, that wasn't a great leap for you because it's pretty much your process anyway?
It wasn't a big leap. It's a little different. I mean, short story, you have to be a little more focused with a short story. You don't have the leeway to kind of wander off in somewhere. You got to be
can't do 17 pages
direct.
of lunch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You got to be a little more focused, and you leave out some of the things. There were some things I left out that, gee, I really like that, but it doesn't add anything to the story. So you go back and edit before you publish.
Right.
And but I mean, that's a genre that I've always enjoyed. Is the light fantasy and science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, one of the early I sold a story to Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine.
Oh wow!
A bazillion years ago.
That's fantastic.
But before that, I had gotten stories rejected by him, by them. It wasn't him. It's George something or other was the editor. I can't remember his name. But that was back when you used to actually get rejection letters. Now they just don't even answer you.
Right. You're lucky if you get a rejection email now.
and I got a rejection letter from the magazine. But in along with that little standard, sorry, it doesn't quite fit them.
Mm-hmm.
There was a little index card. It was handwritten on the index card. It says "Too much talk" in the ending, and it was signed IA.
Nice. Did you frame that?
And I said, I've got it somewhere if I could find it. And I said, Asimov read my story.
That's very, very cool.
And it said, wow. I mean, it must have gotten through the editor for him to show it to Asimov.
Yeah, that's
and
especially.
That was a big deal. Yeah.
That is a big deal. Shortly in my early 20s, I'm a huge Muppet fan, and I sent a resume and a cover letter off to Jim Henson. He was doing Fraggle Rock at the time, and I got a rejection letter from him.
Oh, that's cool.
It's in plastic.
Yeah.
I'm keeping that forever. But yeah, it was my most famous rejection letter.
Yeah, I don't think I kept the rejection letter, but I did keep the index card.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about Reichhold Street. Let me see if I can find it. There it is. Look at that, first try. Yeah. Tell us about this story and how you came into it. And if I'm remembering correctly, there's a series of books on...
Actually, right now there's 4.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, it's kind of grown.
Yeah, I haven't seen the covers in, a year since the bookshop closed, but I remember that there were lots of them. So can you give us an idea of the synopsis of this story and then how it has evolved into the other books?
Well, it really begins with you meet a bunch of kids when they're like 14 living in the neighborhood, and there's a new kid that comes into the neighborhood, and he's kind of a pompous, windbag, blowhard, bully kind of a kid.
Mm-hmm.
But you learn that there's a reason he's like that. Because you learn the stories about all of the characters. There are chapters about. I'll have a whole chapter devoted to a character. Actually, maybe several chapters.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll start the chapter with that character's name, and because I write everything in the first person.
Okay.
And so when the character changes, I put the new name in the chapter heading. Like
okay.
chapter 4.
So when the voice changes, the chapter head changes.
Right.
Okay.
And so you learn, and they talk about a lot of the same things, but you get it from different points of view.
Okay.
And it was just writing a story about family dysfunction and things like that, about growing up. It was kind of a coming-of-age story.
Mm-hmm.
But there was more to it than that. I set it back in the 60s and during the Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And I threw that element of a dysfunctional, it was actually a stepfather,
Okay.
And then you learn that the character had lost his real father. And he had a heart attack or something and died young. And it just tells the story of the people. You meet all the kids, and that's who you meet. You go through it. Is the kids. There is a chapter about about the stepfather. You learn what he's all about, and you also learn why he is kind of dysfunctional.
So let me ask you this. You could have written a coming-of-age story set in any time, place, with any background, any genre. What made you choose Vietnam era as...
That's when I grew up.
Okay.
I mean, my research was... I did a lot of research for it to be sure I was accurate, but I mean, I grew up in that time, so
so it's just a matter of familiarity, and
exactly,
this is you're writing what you know, that thing.
Know.
Yeah.
And things I didn't know, I did the research to find out, and I just went from there.
Okay.
And again, the characters are telling me their story, and I got to the end, and I realized that there was maybe more to this story. So I started One Way Street is the name of the second book.
Okay.
And
I think I've got that on here.
It takes all of the characters.
Nope. I'm trying to find it. We're going to talk about that in a second.
Okay, that one's coming up.
Yeah, I don't have One Way Street on here.
Well, that one is that's just taking the same characters, the ones that are still around, and carrying them a little further.
Okay.
You kind of grow up with them, and I've actually got 4 novels now.
Wow. So let's jump over to this one.
Yeah.
Sally's
Curse.
Sally's Curse. This is the follow-up to Blood Lake, right? So is this the same? This is next generation or a couple generations down the road?
It's the next generation.
Okay.
In Blood
Where
Lake,
you find out the impact of the curse?
Well, you find out pretty much the impact of the curse in the first book.
Okay.
It actually won a bronze medal in the horror category.
Wow.
Because it's kind of gory in places, but
okay.
But you are introduced into Sally's Curse to the young man who's the son of the protagonist in Blood Lake.
Okay.
Who learns what happened, and he's all upset by it, but life goes on, and the kid goes off to college, and on spring break he decides he's going to go down to this lake and find out what goes on down there for himself. This is the son, and he's an only son. So that's nothing else is happening.
Is that book released yet?
No.
It's forthcoming.
Yeah, hopefully it'll be done by December.
That would be great.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Just in time for the holidays.
That's right.
Excuse me. So, do you have any ideas about other genres that you might like to dabble in?
About the only thing I don't write is romance.
Okay.
I mean, I'll write, and maybe westerns. I'm not a big fan of westerns. But
yeah, I'm working on one right now.
I mean,
it's kind of a challenge.
I could be talked
westerns
into it.
Westerns are a challenge.
I could be talked into it, but I like things that are a little more. When I say contemporary, I mean, Vietnam's not contemporary anymore, but the issues around it are contemporary.
Sure. Have you ever considered children's literature?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I wrote a short story. I just never done anything with it for a children's book.
Okay.
And my wife thinks it's too long. So it's only about 800 words.
Okay.
And I thought that would make a good children's book.
What age group?
Well, for 800 words, it'd have to be somebody who could read, obviously.
So like a middle grade.
Yeah, middle grade, yeah.
So standard questions we get asked all the time. You and I do a lot of book festivals, and people are always asking the same questions over and over again, and so I would be remiss if I didn't ask them here. Who's your favorite author?
Oh, okay. I've got several. Wow. I think Ray Bradbury
Good choice.
was one of growing up was one of my favorite authors, and I liked Isaac Asimov, obviously. Robert Heinlein,
Mm-hmm.
science fiction people. But I liked Ray Bradbury just because of the way he used words,
Yeah.
and he would paint the picture, and he dealt with a lot of younger people too.
Yeah, yeah. I loved his turn of phrase ability is just amazing.
Yeah.
He and I think I saw him as a minimalist writer. I mean, he didn't write long, involved passages, but what he did write was so wonderfully vivid
Oh yeah.
that you didn't need a bunch of extra words to get what he was trying to give you.
Yeah. He had some great stories.
So the other standard question is, if, aside from marketing and advertising, because we know you've already done that, if you weren't an author, what else would you be doing with your life?
Oh, good question. Well, I was originally an artist and a designer,
Okay.
which is why I got into advertising in the first place. And I did all my covers, or all my.
You designed all the covers
I
for
do
your
all
books?
my covers.
That's
yeah.
great.
I have a good time. I have fun doing it.
Yeah.
I might try doing something like that.
Okay.
If not just, create art for the sake of creating art.
A noble pursuit in and of itself. What kind of response have you gotten from your family about your writing? Are they warm and fuzzy about it? Are they not sure? I mean,
They like it. I got a granddaughter who took the book to school to show it to her English teacher. And the English teacher said something to the effect that now he knows where she gets it from.
Which book was that?
Reicholt Street.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and she hasn't read most of them. I mean, I didn't have her when she's 17 now.
Mm-hmm.
And when she was 9, I never thought about her reading these books because they're a little more than a 9-year-old.
Right. So we both belong to Rochester Writers. I see you at meetings frequently there.
Right.
We often get newbies, we call them, sitting around the table. And they seem to have the same question. And I thought this was a good question for you in the last 5 minutes that we have. When do I start marketing my book?
When do you start?
When do you start, and what's the best way to get going on that process?
Oh, that's a good question. You'd think somebody who was in marketing as long as I would have an answer.
I'm hoping.
I think you need to start right away. I mean, when you, like I put out that To Sally's Curse cover. I've put that on Facebook and Twitter, talking about that's my next book coming. I don't know if that drives a whole lot of interest, but I start there.
That anticipation factor.
And I put it on Instagram, so. And it's interesting because I have 21,000 followers.
Wow.
On Twitter and on my blog, the blog I write about independent writing, which surprises the heck out of me. I can't figure out why they're not buying books.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? So, do you find any creative correlation between professional writing and writing for fun? I did some professional writing. I was a journalist for a while, and I found them as two completely different pursuits. I was using almost different sides of my brain. Do you find the same thing when you're sitting down to write fiction?
Pretty much. Because I did the same thing. I'd write news releases for public relations, and that's there's a format to that.
Mm-hmm.
The who, what, when, where, and why. And you didn't really deviate from that. My one experience with that, I wrote an article for GM Today when I was back working in General Motors, and I had asked if I could write an article, because I was doing press releases, and
Sure.
GM Today was a monthly internal newsletter. It was a little tabloid newspaper, actually. And I went and they sent me to. They were doing the Washington. GM was sponsoring the Young Washington, and there was the crossing of the Delaware, and they sent me down there and with Barry Bostwick and Patty Duke.
Wow.
And I got
Barry Bostwick and Patty Duke.
Yeah, and I got to interview them, and I wrote the article, but I wrote it almost like a story.
Okay.
And the editor, Alan, didn't like it.
Really?
Because it wasn't the who, what, when, where,
Oh,
what, and how.
you
I
went against formula.
I started off talking about the silence was broken only with the sound of paddles coming across the icy river, and then there was a brilliant flash, and suddenly the director yelled "cut," and that's how I started the story.
Nice.
And
that was too much prose for him?
But that was too much prose, yeah. And my one claim to fame with that was that I had our vice president at the time, Jack McNulty, he's the one I had asked if I could do some writing, and he said, talk to Alan, have him send you somewhere. So he did, and I came back and I saw Jack in the hallway, and he said, "How'd that story go?" Well, I just happened to have the manuscript with me, and I showed it to him, and he liked it. I showed it to Alan. Alan didn't like it, wanted me to redo it, and I got a call from McNulty again. He said, "Well, what did Alan think of it?" I said, "He didn't like it. He wanted me to rewrite it. I'll take care of that." And he told him to run it just exactly as I'd written it. Don't change a word.
Nice.
And give him a byline.
Nice.
And nobody ever got bylines.
That's wonderful.
That was my one fun story working at public relations at GM.
That's fabulous. I'm so glad you came into the studio today. Thank you so much for indulging me in my radio television thing I'm doing here. I really appreciate you coming in. And will you come back when the next book comes out?
Sure.
I would love that. Thanks so much for coming in.
Well, thanks for having me.
Have a nice night.
You too.